This episode of the All Automotive Podcast is brought to you by our friends at GeForce Automotive. GeForce Automotive is a certified service center through Auto Value. Want to make an appointment? Go to their website at www.geforceautomotive.net. Click on the banner that says Make an Appointment and make your appointment today. And now, the next episode of the All Automotive Podcast. All right, welcome back to another episode of All Automotive. I'm your host, Matt Clausen, and today we're going to be talking about something that happened this week at the shop. It was a vehicle that wouldn't start, and it was because it had an issue with the change in the fuel from flex fuel to gasoline. So what's E85? Let's talk about that. There's things that are coming up because the gas prices are going up. I know they're going up everywhere. And it's becoming an issue. So what people are looking for is a least expensive or a cheaper version, trying to save some money. And one of the things that you can do is use this E85 fuel. So let's talk about E85. So what is it? It's E85. It's 85% alcohol or ethanol, and it's made from corn. It's made from plants. So the other 15% is just regular gasoline, but there's some qualifications to that fuel when it comes to that rating. So E85 is primarily the most it could be. The most it can be is 85% alcohol. But in America, it can range anywhere from 51% to 83%. So it's not technically E85. It is an alcohol-based fuel, and it's content could be almost half and half gasoline to alcohol or ethanol. And in other countries, it's not like in a country like Brazil, it's warm in Brazil most of the year. So they don't have it. They have what they call neat ethanol, which is 100%. They can run basically straight ethanol and not have any gasoline because the coefficient of heat with E85 is lower. So it burns cooler. So one of the things we did when we were racing cars and one of the things that, my cousin ran his iCar modified or a modified car, he ran alcohol because one of the benefits of running that alcohol is you've got a very hot engine, hot race car, and you've got this fuel that comes in that's really, really cold. So it lowers the temperature of everything inside the combustion area, which in colder climates, like around Michigan and in the Midwest, it gets cold around here. So we need the start ability, the temperature, the heat that gasoline creates. So that range can range anywhere from 51% to 83%. So keep in mind that if you have a flex fuel vehicle or FFV, you can run this fuel without any issue. Getting back to the colder climate thing, here in Michigan, it gets pretty cold sometimes. It gets down below zero. And if you're running an E85 fuel, it may start harder. Or that blend of fuel, that blend of E85 ethanol will be more gasoline than it will be ethanol because of the temperature. So, and they do this with gasoline as well. Well, they have a winter blend fuel because of the colder temperatures. There's certain additives that they put in the fuel so that it burns better in the winter, or they take additives out because they're not needed in the wintertime. So how does this affect your car or truck? So let's talk about that too. What if you have a flex fuel vehicle and you get to the gas station and you look at, there's three grades that we've generally dealt with gasoline: the regular unleaded, 87, and then a plus version is usually 89 octane, and the Supreme or Super unleaded carries an octane rating of 93. So if you have a performance vehicle or you've got a certain vehicle that requires that kind of octane to run at its optimal performance, that's something that the manufacturer would recommend that you run that 93 octane fuel. So if you're running E85 as far as an octane rating, it's usually anywhere from that 93 to almost 100 octane, which means it burns very good and it adds power. But there are some pros to this E85 ethanol and there are some cons to this E85 ethanol. What your vehicle has to do, it has to read this fuel. So let's say you go to the gas station and you want to put E85 in it because the price is less. And we'll talk about the price and the difference between what that means for you as far as fuel mileage and so forth. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But right now, you go to the gas station and you want to fill up. So we fill up with E85. So your vehicle has what we call a fuel composition sensor. And what its purpose in life is it's designed to read that fuel and let the engine computer know how much alcohol or ethanol is in the fuel so that it can compensate for this fuel. Why has it got to do that, Matt? What your engine has to do in order to run ethanol is it requires more of it to run. So the trade-off is it requires more fuel to run, so your engine computer has to compensate for that. So what the fuel composition sensor does is it reads the fuel. It tells the engine computer what the percentage of that ethanol content is so that it can allow for fuel delivery. And the reason it has to allow for this fuel delivery is it requires more ethanol to run your engine than it would gasoline at E10. Any normal gasoline is going to have an additional alcohol put in it to blend it down just a little bit. You can still get recreational fuel, which is 100% gasoline for your like lawnmower and recreational vehicle as far as a dirt bike or ORV or a side-by-side or something like that. Any recreational vehicle that you would have would not like the 10% alcohol because after a while, the alcohol will break down or sit in that carburetor or fuel system and cause problems as far as clogging up things and whatever if it sits for a long period of time, which most people don't let that happen. However, that 100% gasoline is available. What your engine computer has to determine is what this fuel percentage is. So let's just say that it recognizes that it's that 80% alcohol and the other percentage, the rest of that is gasoline. So because your engine requires more alcohol because of the lower coefficient of heat that it generates, it requires more fuel to run. So you're going to burn more of it as you drive down the road, which could and certainly does lower your fuel mileage, comparatively speaking to gasoline. Okay, so we've filled up our fuel and we've used the E85, and now our engine computer via the fuel composition sensor has told the computer, hey, they've filled it with E85, we need to adjust. So it adjusts that percentage so that it can allow for the fuel delivery to be correct for that type of fuel. So again, it's going to burn more fuel because of the lower coefficient of heat than it would with gasoline. So if your car, for some reason, this composition sensor is telling the engine computer this information and it's not determined correctly, it could cause starting issues or it could cause check engine lights to come on because it thinks that it's either still gasoline or it's still ethanol. So there's some things that came up, and what the situation that came up with the customer at the shop this week was he was running E85 fuel and was having a starting issue. So one of the downsides of E85 is that the cost difference at the pump hasn't been significant enough for people to buy a lot of it. So it sits around in the tanks, and unfortunately it pulls moisture, which is another character trait of this E85. It'll pull moisture from the air and gets locked into that fuel. So this can cause starting problems. It can also cause no starts or poor performance. So the things that I'm cautioning you of is make sure if it's something that you want to do and it's something that is cost effective, then that's something that you should probably think about. So the situation that came up at the shop this week was the customer had been running a tank full of E85, and his fuel composition sensor had the fuel composition rated at 55%, which that's half gasoline, half E85. Now, back when E85 first came out, we always told customers, if you want to go to E85, wait until the vehicle's just about empty before you fill it. Simply because it, depending on that mixture between 50% and 80%, you could dilute the ethanol even further and its performance wouldn't be as great as it could be. Okay, so the customer's percentage was 55%. So then he got down to a quarter of a tank of gas or so and filled it with normal gasoline. So once he filled it with normal gasoline, his fuel composition sensor didn't pick up on the fact that it had changed. That particular vehicle had been stuck or was stuck on the E85 table, fuel table, which was spraying more fuel and causing a hard start, no start for him in the morning. What we had to do with this particular vehicle was erase the memory, or the keep alive memory. In Fords, it's called the keep alive memory. So we had to reset the keep alive memory, which holds that fuel table, so that it could learn itself again from that fuel composition sensor. So it's kind of a technical situation that we've found ourselves in. And this doesn't happen very often, but if it does, it's very time consuming because you don't really realize that that's what's the issue is. But when you check the quality of the fuel and it's primarily alcohol, that turns on a light and then you can continue your diagnosis from there. So what had happened with his particular vehicle, like I was saying, is it got stuck in the E85 table, fuel table, because the percentage was up around 50. It was spraying too much fuel to start, which caused a flood condition, and it wouldn't start until we disabled the fuel pump until it's cranked over enough to where there was no gas or any kind of fuel being sprayed by the fuel injectors, because we disabled the system, and then it finally fired up. And then once we figured out that the alcohol content was incorrect in the computer, we reset that, and then it relearned the value, and it dropped to 30%. So after we did that reset of the keep alive memory, we let the vehicle cool off, pulled the vehicle outside, started it up first thing the next morning, and it was fine. We did go ahead and drive the vehicle again just to see if it would update that fuel composition, but it did not, because it was only at a half a tank. So the rest of this tank is still pretty much going to be in that 30 to 35% range. And it didn't change while I drove it. It was stuck at 34.78 or whatever it was. So this actually caused a problem because he was switching back and forth between regular gasoline and ethanol, or the E85. Moving forward with that, I did explain to the customer that it's a very unique situation that he fell into, that for whatever reason his engine computer didn't compensate for that value, and that's what happened. So now it's fine. So the other problem that I've seen with this particular one, or getting with E85, is that if you do get E85, it gets stuck in that table. And this was a General Motors vehicle that was stuck in the fuel composition table. It didn't learn the new fuel table, so it was stuck in the E85 table, and it caused the check engine light to come on because it was spraying too much fuel. It was setting rich codes, and we just went in and reset the fuel composition to 0, drove it so that it would learn it from the sensor that's on the fuel line, and it went back to 15%, which was an acceptable level, and then that changed the way the fuel was delivered. So again, E85 is going to require more fuel to be delivered in order for your engine to run. So keep that in mind when there's a difference in the price. It's got to work out for you. And let's go, let's dig into that too. So let's do a cost comparison based on your vehicle. So earlier today, I was I was online looking around and was searching for the E85 prices around Michigan and local areas. So what I came up with was E85prices.com, and you can go on this website and check it for yourself. So around here in Michigan, the cost difference between gasoline is currently at $3.89, and it's hovering around the $4 mark. So let's just roughly call it that. As of today, it's $3.89, and then the E85 price is only 20 cents less. It's $3.69. So this gives you a price spread of about 5%. So the only way you can really test to see if your vehicle, what the difference between regular gasoline, your fuel mileage is between regular gasoline and E85, is that if you go get a tank full. So you're down below a quarter of a tank, you need fuel, go to a station that's got E85, you have a flex fuel vehicle, make sure of that. Do not put ethanol in a vehicle that is not designed for E85, because that's going to be a problem. Make sure that your vehicle is a flex fuel vehicle, and most of them nowadays are. The way you know is if you've got a gas cap, it's yellow, and it'll say E85 capable. And also, if you don't know, and it's consult your owner's manual, or call the dealer, call your shop, call me, let me know, or ask me. I can pretty much tell you if your vehicle is an E85 vehicle or not. So you're down below a quarter of a tank, and you fill this up with ethanol, the E85. So you reset your trip. This is how we check our fuel mileage. We reset the trip. We drive till that tank is empty, record our mileage. We fill it back up with ethanol E85, and we divide how many miles we drove by how many gallons we put in. And that's your fuel mileage on that tank of E85. So if you've been keeping track of your fuel mileage, and I would recommend that anybody do this on their car on any given time, once a quarter, you check your mileage just to make sure that you're in the ballpark of what your vehicle is supposed to be doing. Because if your fuel mileage is low, that could potentially be an issue. And that might be something that you want to bring up with us when you bring your car in. So let's just say that your current mileage for your vehicle is 30 miles to the gallon. Just for round figures, we're going to use this example that I came up with. So 30 miles to the gallon times our current price difference is 5%. So I'm going to multiply my 30 miles per gallon by 5%, and I come up with 1.5. So I subtract the 1.5 from 30, and I get 28.5. 28.5 is my cost difference. That's what my car has to do per mile per gallon with E85 in order to be cost effective. So when you get into certain parts, if I'm scrolling down through this web page on E85prices.com, and there's some areas of the country where it most certainly would be cost effective to do it. There's 20% in Ohio, 21% in Columbus, but I don't think the fuel price is accurate. So Columbus, Ohio says 19 or 20% because their fuel cost, comparatively speaking to Michigan, is roughly 50 cents less. And this is an example from this morning. And then it does say their E85 price is $2.84. But so now you got to figure just a little bit more math, and hopefully everybody went to math class and they can figure this out. So on average, your vehicle is going to be 20% less efficient, 20 to 30%. Just depends on how you drive and what the conditions are. I think when I ran E85 in my 2014 Silverado, which was a flex fuel vehicle, I tried it out for a couple of weeks just to see what the difference in the fuel mileage was. And that particular truck ranged anywhere from 18 to 20 miles to the gallon, depending on how heavy my foot was that week. And then when I ran the E85, it was around 11 to 12. So it was about half, or roughly 40%. And then the cost difference really wasn't enough to justify continuing to run the E85. So if you figure a 30 mile per gallon vehicle is 20% less efficient on E85. That equates to about 22.5 miles to the gallon. So 30 miles to the gallon on regular gasoline, and then you get 22.5 miles to the gallon on the less fuel efficient E85. So for us here in Michigan, running E85 right at the moment, because of the 5% difference, you're losing 15% cost-wise. So I know everybody's concerned about the gas prices, and yes, they're going up, so we're trying to find solutions to that. And one of them is this type of fuel. It isn't really cost-effective. So you need to really be around that 20 to 30% cost difference in order for it to be effective, if that's what your goal is. If your goal is to save money at the pump and you see the lower price for the E85, do the math really quick. Just make sure that the difference between the E85 and the regular gasoline is enough to hit that 20% mark. So if you can quickly add that up, you can come to that figure pretty quickly. If we take the 389 and we multiply it by 20%, so it's got to be 78 cents less. So 389 minus 78 is $3.11 is what E85 has to be at 20%. So if your car runs the E85 efficiently and doesn't demand a whole lot of fuel, you're a conscious driver, you're not on the gas, no jackrabbit starts, you're doing well, you get pretty good mileage on gasoline, and the cost difference is there in your state, then by all means it's a good idea. But that's one of the things that is the biggest problem, or is usually the biggest problem with the E85, is that the cost difference just isn't enough to justify running it. And like I was saying, my 2014 truck, I think it was, I was averaging around 19, 20 miles to the gallon, and I ran that E85 and it got around 11 consistently. It was, to me, the difference in the price was only 50 cents or so. And that was a number of years ago. I had that truck for 4 or 5 years, and I think it was about the middle of the time I'd owned that is when I started using that. But there are, like I say, there are benefits to the fuel. There are benefits to running the E85. It's alcohol. Alcohol cleans things. It cleans your fuel system. It cleans your engine. It helps the fuel injectors get cleaned. It makes it run better. It's got more power, but you lose that extra benefit when the cost difference isn't the same, comparatively speaking, to the fuel mileage that you would get on gasoline. And yes, it's better for the environment. It's made with corn. So the corn that they make it with is corn that's grown here in the U.S. So you're creating jobs. You're creating a sale of that corn. You're keeping the farmers working. Everybody in Iowa is going to love you because you're using E85 fuel. So it's primarily something that's used a lot in the Midwest. But as I'm scrolling down some of these, as I'm scrolling down this page, I see a lot of places in California where, the gas price in California, according to this on the 5th, was $5.39, and this is Anaheim, California. It says the E85 was $2.85 a gallon. And if you got a flex fuel, that's 47%. So that makes sense to run the E85 in California if the price is that different. So I guess I'm not really sure why. And I can probably do an addendum to this episode on down the road, or give you some information on down the road about why. I'm not sure why in Michigan the cost difference is so small, but that's something I can research and get back to you folks on that. But again, going back to the benefits of it, you're putting farmers to work. You're keeping their food on their tables by you buying it. It's also good for the environment. There's less tailpipe emissions with E85 than there is with normal gasoline. So there are those benefits if you don't see the cost benefit, but you see the benefit of the other side of it. There is other things that can be a benefit. But the cons are that it does. If the cost difference isn't enough to justify it, the fuel just sits around in the tanks in the gas stations, and nobody uses it because it's not a really good alternative, because it needs to be around 20% at least for me to go to the gas station with a truck or whatever vehicle I have. It's going to have to be that 20%, or it's not really going to be useful for me, especially in the geographical area that I'm in. In the state of Michigan right now, it doesn't make sense for me cost wise. Yeah, once the E85 price catches up to itself and maybe goes down, it might be something I would think about. And it's also something I would think about as an automotive technician, and as somebody that is into performance cars and performance racing and so forth, that the E85 ethanol would clean my fuel system, clean my fuel injectors, clean the system out, so that we don't have issues with fuel injectors and misfires, and it cleans the top of the pistons. If it's direct injected, it still is going to clean the direct injectors that are now in the cylinder heads that don't spray across the intake valves. So there are some benefits to me as a technician or as a shop owner that, hey, maybe run a tank of E85 once or twice a year. Couldn't hurt. If your vehicle's capable of it, let's try it and let's do it. Let's spend that money on the E85 and clean our fuel system so that it doesn't cause an issue, and you got to come to me and I physically have to do this fuel system clean with special tools and so forth. And it'll save you money in the long run, because it's an extra maintenance tip that you can do. But again, be aware that this E85, especially around our general area, it's been sitting in those tanks for quite a while. So I'm kind of questioning its volatility and how it's going to work for you in this general area. If the fuel station that you go to is going through a lot of it, and that's something that you can ask them too. Is how often do you get E85? Or is it delivered weekly? Is it monthly? How long has it been? How long has it been since it's actually came in? And maybe the clerk inside there wouldn't know that, but if you ask the manager, she would know that, or that person would know that. He or she would know that. I assume it's a she, because the gas station I go to, it's a woman. Anyway, yeah, so ask them, well, how long has it been sitting in there? It might be a little concerning, because, we've all known or heard of those people that, they restore cars or they do this or that fuel was left in the gas tank, and the gas tank had to be replaced because of, this is a really long period of time, but normal gasoline can go flat in 90 days. So if you're not driving your vehicle for that long, it might think about that. If you put your vehicle away for a long period of time, if it's something that you store over the winter time, or if it's a vehicle that's, at your vacation home and it's stored for more than 90 days, store it with less fuel in it, or get a fuel additive to add in there. There's all kinds of stuff. Stable, Seafoam is another good one if you want to stabilize the fuel. So some of the things you want to think about if you're thinking about trying to save some money at the pump, and we reach for that E85 handle. Let's check some numbers first, and that's one of the things that I would certainly recommend that you do if you think about running E85. So hopefully today, things I've talked about as far as the E85 and what it is, the range of the 51% to 83%, keep that in mind too. So when we're getting this fuel, so because of the colder climates, it's going to be a lower percentage. And then because of our government, they unregulated that. So there was a range so that it would work in all geographic areas. The United States is pretty big. I mean, it gets pretty cold in the northern states, and then we've got warmer climates that don't require that diluted E85. So and keep in mind, your vehicle has to compensate for that, and it has to know it's got sensors and sophisticated equipment that's on there to recognize that. You have special fuel lines, you have special fuel injectors because of this E85. And then, again, just do the cost comparison. Make sure it's around 20 to 30% difference between gasoline and give it a shot. It's something that, I recommend that you do if it's cost effective for you. Your vehicle can certainly handle it. We can certainly handle it as if there's an issue. I would certainly recommend going with E85 if it's cost effective for you and it makes sense for you. All right, that's going to do it for another episode of All Automotive. And hey, when you're on your favorite podcast site, hit that follow or subscribe button. It helps us let you know when there's a new episode. Until next time, I'm Matt Clausen. Hey, thanks for listening to All Automotive.